The rain battered the windows of our cramped Seattle apartment, a relentless drumbeat that drowned out the world. I stood frozen in the doorway of Noah's room, my heart a wild thing caged in my chest, as he lay sprawled across his bed, shirtless, his eyes glinting with something I couldn't name. "Come here, Ezra," he'd slurred, his voice thick with whiskey and secrets, and before I could think, his hand closed around my wrist, pulling me into the dark. I'm Ezra Martinez, 24, a graphic designer with too many dreams and not enough courage. I'd moved to Seattle 6 months ago, chasing a job at a tech startup and a fresh start after a messy breakup back in Phoenix. Noah Callahan, my roommate, was the opposite of me in every way. 28, a broad-shouldered mechanic with a crooked grin and a drawl that screamed small-town Montana. Straight as an arrow, or so I thought, with a rotating cast of girlfriends who left lipstick stains on our coffee mugs. We'd become friends fast, bonding over late-night pizza and his endless stories of fixing cars for eccentric clients. But that night, under the haze of cheap liquor and a flickering lamp, something shifted. I sank onto the edge of his bed, the springs creaking under my weight. My pulse raced as Noah's hand lingered on my wrist, his calloused fingers warm against my skin. "You ever wonder what it's like?" he asked, his voice low, almost a whisper. The question hung between us, heavy with meaning I wasn't ready to unravel. I wanted to laugh it off, to pretend he was just drunk and rambling, but his eyes held mine, searching, daring me to answer. "I don't know what you mean," I lied, my voice barely steady. Noah chuckled, a sound that sent a shiver down my spine. He leaned closer, the scent of whiskey and motor oil clinging to him, and for a moment, I thought he might kiss me. Instead, he flopped back onto the pillow, his hand still loosely holding mine. "You're too good, Ezra," he mumbled, eyes fluttering shut. "Too damn good." I sat there, heart pounding, until his breathing deepened into sleep. The rain kept falling, and I slipped out of his room, my mind a tangle of questions. What had just happened? Why had he looked at me like that? And why did I want to go back? The next morning, Noah acted like nothing had happened. He was all grins, frying eggs in our tiny kitchen, humming some country tune. I tried to match his ease, but every time our eyes met, I felt the weight of last night pressing against my ribs. I wanted to ask him what he'd meant, why he'd pulled me into his bed, but the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I buried myself in work, sketching logos and ignoring the way my stomach flipped whenever he walked by. Days turned into weeks, and the incident became a ghost that haunted our apartment. Noah didn't mention it, and I didn't dare. But something had changed. He started lingering when we talked, his shoulder brushing mine when we watched movies on the couch. Once, when I was washing dishes, he reached past me for a glass, his chest grazing my back, and I nearly dropped a plate. Each moment was a spark, threatening to ignite something neither of us was ready to face. Seattle's autumn was relentless, gray skies, endless drizzle, and a chill that seeped into your bones. I started spending more time at a local coffee shop, the Rusty Bean, sketching in a corner booth to escape the tension at home. That's where I met Lena, a 26-year-old barista with a shaved head and a laugh that could light up the room. She was queer, unapologetically so, and we bonded over shared playlists and stories of navigating love in a world that didn't always understand. I told her about Noah, leaving out the part about his bed but not the confusion in my heart. "You're into him," Lena said one evening, sliding a latte across the counter. Her eyes were sharp, seeing through my deflections. "And he's giving you mixed signals. Classic closet case." "He's not," I started, but the words died. "Was he?" Noah had never said anything about being anything other than straight, but the way he looked at me sometimes, the way his touch lingered, it didn't feel straight. Lena raised an eyebrow, and I sighed, running a hand through my hair. I don't know what he is. I don't know what I am anymore. She reached across the counter, squeezing my hand. You'll figure it out, Ezra. But don't let him string you along. You deserve someone who knows what they want. Her words stuck with me, a lifeline in the storm of my thoughts. I wanted to believe Noah was just confused, that his actions were a fluke, but the memory of his hand on my wrist burned too brightly. I started noticing things I hadn't before. The way he'd watch me when he thought I wasn't looking, the way his voice softened when he said my name. It was intoxicating and it terrified me. One night, after a long day at work, I came home to find Noah on the couch, a beer in hand, staring at the TV. The room was dim, the glow of the screen casting shadows across his face. "You're late," he said, not looking at me. "Work ran over," I replied, kicking off my shoes. I hesitated, then sat beside him closer than usual. The air felt charged, like the moment before a storm breaks. "Noah," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "We need to talk about that night." His jaw tightened, and for a moment, I thought he'd brush me off again. But then he turned, his blue eyes locking onto mine, and I saw it. Fear, raw and unguarded. "I don't know what I was thinking," he said, his voice rough. "I was drunk, Ezra. It didn't mean anything." The words hit like a punch, but I didn't flinch. "Didn't it?" I asked, leaning closer. "Because it's been weeks, and you're still looking at me like you did that night." He froze, his beer halfway to his lips. For a heartbeat, neither of us moved. Then he set the bottle down, his hand trembling. "You don't get it," he said, his voice breaking. "I'm not like you. I can't just be that." The confession hung between us, fragile and sharp. I wanted to reach for him, to tell him it was okay, but the weight of his words kept me rooted. He wasn't ready, not for this, not for me. But as I looked into his eyes, I saw something else. A crack in the wall he'd built around himself. A glimpse of the man he was too afraid to be. Noah's words echoed in my head as I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling of my room. "I'm not like you." They stung, not because they were cruel, but because they were honest. He was running from something I'd spent years learning to embrace, and I didn't know how to bridge that gap. The next few days were a tightrope walk. Noah avoided me, leaving for work before dawn and coming home late, reeking of motor oil and exhaustion. I tried to give him space, but the apartment felt smaller, the air thick with unspoken words. I threw myself into my designs, losing hours to my tablet, but every stroke of my stylus carried the weight of his confession. I wanted to help him, to pull him out of whatever storm was raging inside him, but I didn't know where to start. Lena became my anchor. At the Rusty Bean, she listened as I poured out my frustration, her dark eyes steady and kind. "He's scared, Ezra," she said one afternoon, wiping down the counter. "Small-town straight boys don't just wake up one day and admit they're into guys. It's a process." "I know," I said, stirring my coffee. "But I can't stop thinking about him. It's messing with my head." She leaned forward, her voice firm. "Then set boundaries. Protect yourself. You can't fix him if he's not ready to fix himself." Her advice made sense, but it didn't make it easier. I went home that night determined to talk to Noah, to lay everything bare. But when I walked in, I found him in the kitchen, chopping vegetables with a focus that bordered on manic. "You're cooking?" I asked, surprised. Noah wasn't exactly a chef. His culinary skills usually stopped at microwaving leftovers. Figured I'd try something new, he said, not meeting my eyes. You hungry? I nodded, and we fell into an uneasy rhythm, him cooking, me setting the table. The normalcy of it was almost painful, a reminder of how easy things used to be. Over dinner, surprisingly decent stir-fry, we talked about everything but the elephant in the room. Work, movies, the Seahawks' latest game. But when the plates were cleared and we sat across from each other, the silence grew heavy. Noah, I started, my voice steady despite the knot in my chest. We can't keep pretending nothing happened. He looked down at his hands, his knuckles white. I don't know what to say, Ezra. I'm trying to figure it out. Figure what out? I pressed, leaning forward. What you feel, what you want, because I'm right here, and I'm not going anywhere. His eyes flicked up, and for a moment, I saw the same vulnerability from that night on his bed. I've never felt like this, he admitted, his voice barely audible. Not with anyone. But I don't know how to do this. My heart ached for him, for the fear that kept him tethered to a version of himself he didn't fully believe in. You don't have to have it all figured out, I said softly. But you have to be honest. With me. With yourself. He nodded, but the distance between us felt wider than ever. That night, I dreamed of him, of his hand on my wrist, of a world where he wasn't afraid. When I woke, the apartment was quiet, and Noah was gone. The weeks that followed were a blur of routine. Work, coffee with Lena, late-night sketches. Noah and I settled into a fragile truce, polite but guarded. I tried to focus on myself, even going on a date with a guy from the startup, a charming coder named Raj. He was sweet, funny, openly gay, everything Noah wasn't. But as we sat across from each other at a trendy Capitol Hill bar, I couldn't stop comparing him to Noah. The way his laugh didn't crinkle his eyes, the way his touch didn't set my skin on fire. I was falling for Noah, and it terrified me. Not just because he was straight or struggling, but because I knew how much it could hurt to love someone who might never love me back. Then came the night that changed everything. It was a Friday, the air crisp with the promise of winter. I'd stayed late at the Rusty Bean, sketching while Lena closed up. When I got home, Noah was on the couch, a bottle of bourbon on the coffee table. His eyes were red, his face drawn. "You okay?" I asked, dropping my bag by the door. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he poured a shot and slid it across the table. "Sit," he said, his voice rough. I did, my heart pounding. He took a deep breath, then looked at me, his gaze steady for the first time in weeks. "I went back to Montana last weekend," he said. "Saw my dad." I waited, sensing the weight of what was coming. Noah's dad was a hard man, a retired rancher with rigid views and a quick temper. Noah rarely talked about him, but when he did, his voice carried a shadow. "He found out," Noah said, his voice breaking. "About me. About us." My stomach dropped. "What do you mean, he found out?" I asked, my voice tight. Noah's hands were shaking as he poured another shot, but he didn't drink it. He just stared at the amber liquid, as if it held the answers he couldn't find. "Someone saw us," he said finally. "That night at the bar when we were playing pool. I didn't think anyone from home was around, but small world, I guess. They told my dad they saw me with a guy acting close. I remembered that night, laughing over cheap beer, Noah's arm slung casually over my shoulder. It hadn't felt like anything more than friendship then, but to an outsider, maybe it looked different. "What did he say?" I asked, dreading the answer. Noah's laugh was bitter. Called me every name in the book. Said I was a disappointment, that I was throwing away everything he'd taught me. Told me to stay in Seattle if I was gonna choose that life. His voice cracked on the last word, and he looked away, his jaw tight. I wanted to reach for him, to pull him into a hug, but I stayed still. "I'm so sorry, Noah," I said, my voice soft. "That's not fair. You don't deserve that." He shook his head, his eyes distant. "Maybe he's right. Maybe I'm just confused. Maybe I'm not supposed to feel this way." The words cut deeper than I expected. "Feel what way?" I asked, my heart racing. "Noah, talk to me." He looked at me then, his blue eyes raw with pain. "I don't know how to say it," he admitted. "But when I'm with you, it's like everything makes sense. And it scares the hell out of me." My breath caught. It was the closest he'd come to admitting what I'd suspected, what I'd hoped. But the fear in his voice, the weight of his father's words, kept me from celebrating. "You don't have to have all the answers," I said, echoing my earlier words. "But you can't keep running from this." He nodded, but the silence that followed was heavy. We sat there, the bourbon bottle between us, until he finally stood and disappeared into his room. I didn't sleep that night, my mind replaying his words, his pain, the way his eyes had searched mine for something I wasn't sure I could give. The next morning, Noah was different. Not warmer exactly, but more present. He made coffee, handed me a mug without a word, and sat across from me at the table. "I'm gonna try," he said simply. "I don't know what that means yet, but I'm gonna try." It wasn't a promise, but it was enough. For the first time, I felt a flicker of hope, fragile but real. Over the next few weeks, Noah started opening up. Small things at first, telling me about his childhood in Montana, the pressure to be the son his father wanted. He talked about his first crush, a girl in high school, and how it had never felt as intense as he'd expected. "I thought that was just how it was," he said one night, as we sat on the roof of our building, the city sprawling below us. "But then I met you." My heart stuttered, but I kept my voice steady. "What's different about me?" He looked at me, his expression soft but serious. "You make me feel alive, like I'm not just going through the motions." I wanted to kiss him then, to close the distance between us, but I held back. He was still finding his way, and I didn't want to push him too far, too fast. Instead, I reached for his hand, my fingers brushing his. He didn't pull away. That moment on the rooftop became our turning point. We started spending more time together, not just as roommates, but as something more. We'd cook dinner, watch old movies, take walks along the waterfront. Each moment was a step closer, a quiet rebellion against the fear that had held him back. But it wasn't easy. I saw the way he tensed when his phone buzzed with a call from home, the way his smile faltered when he thought I wasn't looking. Lena noticed the change too. "You're glowing," she teased one afternoon at the Rusty Bean. "What's going on with you and Mr. Montana?" I grinned, unable to hide it. "He's trying. We're figuring it out." She raised an eyebrow. "Just be careful, okay? He's still got a lot of baggage." I knew she was right, but I couldn't help the hope blooming in my chest. Noah was opening up, and I was falling harder every day. But then came the call that shattered everything. It was a Tuesday night, and we were sprawled on the couch, half watching a sci-fi flick. Noah's phone rang, and he frowned at the screen before answering. "Hey, Dad," he said, his voice tight. I couldn't hear the other side of the conversation, but I saw Noah's face change. His jaw clenched, his eyes darkening. When he hung up, he didn't speak for a long moment. "He's coming to Seattle," he said finally. "Next week." The air in the apartment felt heavier after Noah's announcement. His father, Jack Callahan, was a storm cloud on the horizon, and I could see the dread in Noah's eyes every time he mentioned him. "He just wants to check on me," Noah said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Make sure I'm not screwing up my life." I wanted to tell him he wasn't screwing up anything, that he was finally starting to live authentically, but I held back. Instead, I squeezed his shoulder, offering what little comfort I could. "Whatever happens, I'm here," I said. He gave me a small, grateful smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. The week before Jack's arrival was a blur of tension. Noah threw himself into work, coming home late and exhausted, while I tried to keep things light, cooking his favorite meals, suggesting movie nights. But the closer the visit got, the more distant he became. I caught him staring out the window one night, his expression unreadable. "What if he's right?" he whispered, almost to himself. "What if this isn't who I'm supposed to be?" "You're the only one who gets to decide that," I said, my voice firm. "Not him. Not anyone." He nodded, but I could tell he wasn't convinced. The night before Jack arrived, Noah reached for my hand as we sat on the couch, his grip tight. "I don't want to lose this," he said, his voice raw. "Whatever this is." "You won't," I promised, even as fear gnawed at me. I wanted to believe it, but I knew how much his father's approval meant to him. Jack Callahan arrived on a rainy Saturday morning, his presence filling the apartment like a thunderclap. He was a tall man, broad like Noah but with a weathered face and eyes that seemed to judge everything they landed on. I introduced myself as Noah's roommate, keeping my voice neutral, but Jack's handshake was curt, his gaze lingering on me a moment too long. The day was a masterclass in tension. Noah took his dad to a diner for lunch, then to a car show downtown. But when they came back, the air between them was electric with unspoken words. I stayed in my room, sketching, trying to give them space, but I could hear their voices through the thin walls. Jack's low and commanding, Noah's strained. Dinner was my idea, a desperate attempt to ease the strain. I cooked spaghetti, something simple and neutral, and we sat around the small table, the silence broken only by the clink of forks. Jack talked about Montana, about the ranch, about how Noah's brother was stepping up in his absence. Every word felt like a jab, and I saw Noah's shoulders tense with each one. "So, Ezra," Jack said, turning to me, his tone deceptively casual. "You from around here?" "Phoenix originally," I said, keeping my voice light. "Moved here for work." He nodded, but his eyes were sharp. "You two seem close," he said, and the words landed like a challenge. "We're friends." Noah cut in, his voice tight. "Good friends." Jack's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Good. A man needs friends. Keeps him grounded." The rest of the meal passed in a blur, and when Jack left for his hotel, Noah collapsed onto the couch, his face pale. "He knows," he said, his voice hollow. "He didn't say it, but he knows." I sat beside him, my heart aching. "What does that mean for you?" He didn't answer, just leaned his head against my shoulder, his breathing uneven. For the first time, I felt the full weight of what he was carrying. The fear, the shame, the longing to be enough. I wrapped an arm around him, holding him close, and we sat there in silence, the rain drumming against the windows. The next day, Jack's visit ended, but the damage lingered. Noah was quieter, his smiles forced. I tried to reach him, but he pulled back, his walls higher than ever. One night, I found him on the roof, staring at the city lights. "I can't keep doing this," he said, his voice breaking. "I can't keep pretending I'm someone I'm not." "Then don't," I said, stepping closer. "Be who you are, Noah. With me." He turned to me, his eyes shining with unshed tears. I want to, he whispered. God, Ezra, I want to. He kissed me then, sudden and desperate, his hands cupping my face. It was everything I'd imagined, fierce, tender, electric. But when he pulled back, his expression was haunted. I need time, he said, his voice barely audible. I'm not ready yet. I nodded, my throat tight. I'll wait, I said, even though it hurt, because I knew, in that moment, that I loved him. Time became a strange thing after that kiss. Days stretched into weeks, each one a delicate balance of hope and heartache. Noah didn't pull away completely, but he was cautious, his touches fleeting, his smiles rare. I gave him space, leaning on Lena and my work to keep me grounded. But every night, as I lay in bed, I replayed that moment on the roof. The taste of his lips, the warmth of his hands, the promise of something more. Winter settled over Seattle, blanketing the city in frost and fog. Noah started therapy, a quiet decision he shared one morning over coffee. I need to figure myself out, he said, his voice steady but vulnerable. Not just for you, for me. I was proud of him even as it scared me. Therapy meant confronting the parts of himself he'd buried, and I didn't know where that would leave us. But I saw glimmers of change. Small moments when he'd laugh freely, or hold my hand under the table at the rusty bean, his fingers warm against mine. Lena noticed it too. He's coming around, she said one evening, as we closed up the coffee shop. But you've got to take care of yourself too, Ezra. Don't lose you in this. She was right, and I started reclaiming pieces of myself I'd let slip. Sketching for fun, not just work. Joining a local queer art collective. Even planning a trip back to Phoenix to see my family. But Noah was never far from my thoughts. A constant pull on my heart. One night, as snow dusted the city, Noah came home with a look I hadn't seen before. Resolute, almost peaceful. He found me in the living room, sketching by the window, and sat beside me. I told my dad, he said, his voice steady. Everything. My pencil froze. Everything. He nodded. Told him I'm figuring out who I am. That I care about you. A lot. His cheeks flushed, but he didn't look away. He didn't take it well, but I'm done hiding. I set my sketchbook down, my heart pounding. What does that mean for us? He took my hand, his grip firm. It means I want to try, really try, with you. The words were a lifeline, pulling me out of the uncertainty that had haunted me for months. I leaned in, kissing him softly, and this time he didn't pull away. It wasn't perfect. There was still fear in his eyes, still a long road ahead, but it was real. We spent the next few months building something new. Noah came out to his brother, who surprised him with quiet support. He lost contact with his father, a wound that would take time to heal, but he found strength in the community we built. Lena, the art collective, even Raj, who became a friend. I learned to trust the slow, steady rhythm of our love, to embrace the messiness of it. One night, as we stood on the roof again, the city glittering below, Noah wrapped his arms around me, his chin resting on my shoulder. I was so scared, he murmured, but you made it worth it. I turned to face him, my heart full. You're worth it too. That moment under the stars was a promise. Not of a perfect ending, but of a beginning. We'd both been haunted by fear, by doubt, by the weight of who we were supposed to be. But together we found something stronger. The courage to be ourselves, to love without shame, to build a life that was ours. And that, more than anything, was what haunted me. Not with pain, but with hope.